Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is HM 101 Fall 2020 Lecture 25 Descriptive Writing. This is being presented by the instructor Miss Moneeza Rafiq, a lecturer at GIK Institute. Now, previously we covered the first style of writing, which was narrative writing, and we did some activities based on that. We also read a chapter from the assigned book. Now we are going on to the second style of writing, which is descriptive writing. So let's find out how you define that and what are the elements involved. Now, descriptive writing is used to tell readers about physical characteristics of a person, a place, or a thing. Description relies on your five senses, that is, sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Through this description, you communicate your view of the world to your readers. Now, basically, you are describing an object or a person or, say, a place. You are using your five senses to describe what you see, what you feel, or what you hear. And this kind of description is to help your readers or to help the people who are listening visualize or imagine what it is that you are describing. Now, there are several types of descriptive writing on the screen in front of you. There are biographies, travel writing, nature writing, journal writing, and poetry. Biography is something that you are already familiar with. It is a form of a detailed work based on the life of a person, typically a famous personality. There are also autobiographies which are written by people themselves. Then there is travel writing, in which you describe a place where you have visited, and your purpose is to help your readers imagine that they are at that place with you. Nature writing is meant to describe the beauty of nature, and it can be fictional or non-fictional. Now, one famous writer in nature writing would be William Wordsworth, who is a British poet. Journal writing is something that you have all been involved in since we started writing skills, and this is something that I hope you will continue, as journal writing is a daily record of events or work you do, and they help you describe your events, your memories, your feelings, and your experiences. Then, of course, the most common form of descriptive writing is poetry, in which the author describes their feelings, emotions, and ideas in vivid and imaginative language. And this is something that helps the readers delve into the imaginary world or the memories of the writer. Now, in front of you on the screens, there is a paragraph on descriptive writing, which is based on the visuals of a cat that was seen in a vacant lot. And on the top right corner of your screen, you will notice that there are color-coded five senses. So, for example, the color yellow is dedicated to the sense of sight. Now, if you look at the paragraph and you notice that the highlighted sentences in yellow cover the sense of sight, or they cover the visual aspect of the object being described. So in this case, the cat is being described, and this particular yellow highlighted paragraph shows what her eyes were like, what her paws were like, and what the general shape or the general effect of the cat was. Now, if you look at the rest of the paragraphs or the rest of the phrases that are highlighted, you will notice that they cover each of the five senses. So this is a good example of how descriptive writing is typically meant to cover your five senses and help you imagine an object through those senses. There is a big difference between a narration and description, and this is something that you need to familiarize yourself with. Narrative writing presents a series of events. It tells a story. A good narrative may depend heavily on descriptive details. A narrative, however, always presents events in time in some sort of chronological order. On the other hand, a description presents things in spatial order. So you see that the main difference between narration and description is that while the narrative writing tells events in a series or in chronological order, the descriptive writing tells things in spatial order. Now, what spatial order means is how things are laid out or how things are displayed in space. For example, if you are describing a room, then you would talk about how that room is laid out. You would describe the number of chairs, tables, other furniture items, the color of the walls, the general size and shape of the room. So you're basically describing things in space. And this is, of course, in contrast to narrative writing, in which you are talking about events in time. Now, there are two major types of descriptions. There is the objective description and the subjective description. The main difference, or the first difference between the two, is that objective description focuses on the object rather than your personal reaction to it. On the other hand, your subjective description focuses on your personal response to the subject. So what this means is, if you take the example of your own bed or your bedroom, your objective description would be simply describing that object and not giving any personal feelings related to it. So if you're describing your bed, you would tell what kind of a bed sheet is covered by it, what kind of pillows there are, how many pillows there are, what is the size of the bed, the color, the shape, and so on. On the other hand, if you're subjective about describing your own bed, then you would tell about the feelings or your own responses or your memories associated with that bed. So you would tell how you have been sleeping in that bed for the past 10 years, for example, and how you have spent your childhood on that bed or other valuable memories associated with it. So when you're being subjective, you're talking about your feelings and your emotions. Naturally, in objective writing, your purpose is to present a precise and literal picture of your subject, while in subjective description, your purpose is to get the reader to share your feelings or to convey the significance of the sensory details. So you're explaining why describing the bed, the way you're describing it, why is that important to you, why those memories, those feelings are important, and why they are associated with that object. Now, there is a very simple example of objective description and subjective description. A biologist describing what he sees through a microscope would be a very objective description, as the biologist would simply describe the microbe that he or she is seeing through the microscope. The subjective description would be describing a fire, not only its temperature and duration, but also how the fire made you feel. So when you saw the fire, were you scared? Were you shocked? Were you concerned? Or was it a normal sort of a fire, say a fire being used to burn trash, and you had no reaction to it whatsoever? In that case, you are being subjective. Now, subjective has a particular type of language, and this is something that I will describe later on. And now there is another very detailed example of objective and subjective description. In the objective description, you have this example of Thomas Barrett's description of Shakespeare's theater. So you'll notice that Thomas Barrett simply describes objectively what the theater was like, how many entrances the building had, when the building was created or constructed, so on and so forth. There are no feelings or emotions involved. On the other hand, you have the subjective example. In this case, it is the description of a sunset on the Mississippi River given by Mark Twain. So in this case, you notice how he describes the sunset. He talks about the red hue that brightened into gold. He talks about a solitary log that was floating, black and conspicuous. So you'll notice that there is a difference between the writing, or rather the language, that is being used by objective and subjective descriptions. Now, how do you structure a descriptive essay or a descriptive paragraph? There are 6 main ways that you can structure it, and they are on the screen in front of you. If you look at the first one, it is being, or rather going from specific description to general description. So when you're describing an object, say you're describing a chair, you could be very specific, as in describing the color, describing the shape of it, describing what the chair is used for, where it is placed, what its function is. And then you could go on to a general description as to what the overall effect of the chair is, that it looked very comfortable, very cozy, or it looked very businesslike. Then you could also use the reverse order when you're structuring your essay. You could go from a general description to a specific description. So you could go from an overall look of the object and then get into the specific details of what that object is made up of. You could also go from the least important feature of that object to the most important one. So if you're describing your own bed, for example, you could go and explain that it's wood, or the type of wood being used to make that bed is something that's very or not very important to you. And then you could go on and describe the most important feature of the bed, which is providing comfort. You can also structure your essay by going from the smallest item to the largest item. So if you're, for example, describing a room or a house, you could go from the smallest bedroom or room to the largest room. You could go from the smallest object in the room and then go on to bigger and bigger and then the biggest object. When you are talking about structuring an essay in a different way, you could go from least unusual aspect of an object to the most unusual detail. So the least unusual aspect of your bed, for example, would be that it has a pillow. And the most unusual detail of your bed would be, for example, its shape. Say it is circular or round in shape, and that would be something unusual or unique. You can also structure your descriptive essay by going from top to bottom or bottom to top. Now this means if, for example, you're describing a person, then you could go and begin from the top, that is describing their hair, their facial features, their head shape or size, going on to the neck, shoulders, torso, legs, and then eventually the feet. So you're literally going from top to bottom of a person when you're describing them. Again, you could go from bottom to top, and this is another way to structure your essay. Of course, at the same time, you can also use 2 or 3 different approaches, mix and match them, and make your own style of structuring your essay or your paragraph. Now, there are certain essentials of an effective description that you need to keep in mind. The first step is to use or to focus on a dominant impression that your object would give. A dominant impression creates a mood or atmosphere in your paper. So if you are describing your bed, the dominant impression could be the comfort, the relaxation, the homely feeling that it gives. Sensory description is again something very important and is an essential part of your descriptive writing. Naturally, you need to help your readers experience your object through all the 5 senses. 3, the sensory details that you select should create in your reader's mind a picture that you have in your mind. Instead of using vague, general words, your sensory language should be concrete and sensory-packed. This makes the difference between vivid and vague language. Now, what I mean by vivid and vague language can be clarified by using examples. So if you're saying the sprinkler was refreshing, then you're being very vague. What do you mean by refreshing? And why was it refreshing? Then the vivid version of that would be the cool water from the sprinkler sprayed our hot faces. So in this case, you see that the idea of refreshment is already there in the words. Now you're telling the readers that your faces or your body temperature was hot and the cool water felt really good on it. So you're being very vivid and you're helping the readers imagine it. Now you've got a sample description on the screen in front of you of what a vivid and sensory-packed paragraph in descriptive writing looks like. So in this case, a person or a first-person narrator is describing a family dinner. This person describes the booth, the atmosphere, the aroma of the food, how it felt to be close to your family, and what the food looked like, and how the outside was cold compared to the inside of the diner. So you'll notice that vivid language can be seen in words like crispy French fries, thick milkshake, jukebox playing the songs that we knew the words to, the food was enticing on the table, shivering in the cold air outside, the aroma of gravy over creamy mashed potatoes. So these are very sensory and vivid descriptions. Now, when you're talking about sensory detail, there are a couple of things that you need to avoid. The first one is using too many adjectives. Using too many objectives can hinder your work and can make it difficult for the reader to follow. So what you have to do is retain only the most powerful words in your writing and delete any unnecessary words. You can also make the mistake of using too many adverbs, and you have to remember that sometimes verbs can be stronger in creating an image than adverbs. So for example, she strolled into the room is much more powerful than saying she walked casually into the room. Third, you have to avoid cliched figures of speech. Overused language can be frankly very boring, and it can make your readers feel like this is a traditional or typical piece of writing and there is nothing unique or new in it. So words like green with envy, they signal a lack of imagination. You must use fresh words and original language that goes against your traditional or your expected way of thinking. When we're talking about language, it is already clear that there is a big difference between the language used in objective descriptions versus the language used in subjective descriptions. In the latter, you're most likely to use connotation of words, that is, the emotions associated with them, rather than their literal meaning. Such language also relies on elaborative or imaginative comparisons. Now, what this means is that you are using figures of speech. Now, if you go onto the internet, you will notice that there is a big list of figures of speech. There are thousands of them that you can use. Here on the screen in front of you, however, there are 6 major ones. So when you say things like as strong as an ox or as red as a rose, red like a rose, then this is called a simile. It is a type of language in which you compare one thing to another. A metaphor is another type of figurative language in which you're comparing two things, but you're basically saying one thing is like the other one. So you can say love is a battlefield. Naturally, you're being metaphorical and not literal here. Other examples of figures of speech include oxymoron, in which you are talking about two contradictory words, hyperbole, in which you are exaggerating in order to create an effect or make a point, onomatopoeia, in which you use words that describe the sounds exactly. And then there is personification, which is a type of language in which you give an inanimate object or item a sense of being alive. Your main purpose in your descriptive paragraph or your descriptive work should be to show the readers what something looks like rather than telling them. So you have to rely on specific details. You have to help your readers imagine what you are describing. So don't be satisfied with words like he looked angry when you can say things like his face flushed and one corner of his mouth twitched as he tried to control his anger. So you see the difference here? The difference between one and the other is where you are showing the readers what a person looked like when they were angry, rather than simply telling them. Now we have covered some of the basics of descriptive writing. We have, in short, talked about the definition of descriptive writing. We have talked about two main types, that is the objective description. We have talked about their examples, details, the type of language that can be used in descriptive writing, and what the main purpose of your descriptive writing is supposed to be. And now on the screens in front of you, there is a writing task. While I am assigning this task, I would like to point out that in your assigned page 89, you would see the chapter on description or descriptive writing. I have covered the majority of the aspects that are there in that chapter. However, at the end of it, you will have a small essay based on Mark Twain's description of the sunset or Mark Twain's description of the Mississippi River. So you could take that as an example of a descriptive essay. Now, on to the writing tasks. There are two tasks that are there on the screen in front of you. It is up to you which task you pick based on your own personal preference. In both cases, you have to write at least half a page and submit for the next lecture. So the first one is a description of a scene you remember from your childhood, and you have to explain how your adult impression of the same scene is different from your childhood experience. Now, the scene can be anything. It could be, say, an important event like a marriage or a birthday. It could be another event like the death of a person, or a loved one in your family, or going to a new place. It is entirely up to you. The second task is to look outside the window and describe whatever you see in detail. You would start with things that jump out at you immediately, and then you would go on and describe some things that you did not notice at first. So once again, pick one of the two tasks. Write your paragraph at least half a page in typed form and submit it over Microsoft Teams before the next lecture. This task would then help to mark your attendance, and it would also be counted toward your class activities. This is all for the lecture. Until the next one, Allah Hafiz.